You are infinitely loved by an infinite God. Everyone you love is infinitely loved by an infinite God, way more than you could ever love them. And everyone you hate is infinitely loved by an infinite God, way more powerfully than you could ever hate them. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Love Your Unlovable podcast. I am your host, the wildly unlovable yet infinitely loved Eileen Chevalier. So today we are going to start a series. This is the Mike and Eileen story. So Mike and I met a little over 20 years ago. We got married. Well, we got married, we got pregnant, we got separated, we got back together, all within 8 months. So it was pretty tumultuous at the beginning. And, we still have our moments. But we're learning, and we've learned a lot about love and staying together and what that means. So in this podcast, it's just Love Your Unlovable. And it started as Love Your Unlovable Self. But I don't know, I just went downstairs and I was like, come on, babe, do this with me. And it ended up being the whole series of the Mike and Eileen story, which is kind of where I want to start. Just because everybody's got their story. And I think sometimes you think you're really alone in having a difficult time with your spouse, but I want you to know that that's not true. We too have really struggled, and we've figured some stuff out. And even if nothing that we specifically do helps you, just to know that there are other people who have struggled and made it, I think is really important. So from now until Valentine's Day, which is 8 weeks away. So we have an 8-week series. The kind of introduction will be this episode that you're going to listen to now. And then the very last episode of our story is on Valentine's Day. So I hope you enjoy it. I'd love your feedback. On Tuesdays, I just read an excerpt from something I've written. So in 2011, when Mike was making the album, the Mike and Eileen album, which we play songs from in each podcast episode, I started writing a book, which is written my perspective of it. And so some of the excerpts are from that. And some of the excerpts are just from other things I've written sort of along the way. But yeah, tune in on Tuesdays for those. And then Fridays are their longer form podcasts. So thank you for joining us. And I hope you get a lot out of it. I hope it's going to be a wonderful journey for us. Enjoy. Hi, honey.
Hi, beautiful.
So yesterday was December 7th.
Yeah, it was 2024.
Mm-hmm. And December 7th, 2004, rewind 20 years. I wasn't there with you. Wow, dude.
You're crying because it was really intense. So real quick, we got married. We met in June of 2004. We got married in September of 2004. And Eileen got pregnant in November of 2004.
Bam, bam, bam.
And by December 7th, the day of December 6th and 7th, we were having a really tough time. And we were fighting, and you found out you were pregnant.
Yeah, but I wasn't actually with you. Yeah, it was all the worst, right?
It was pretty intense.
It felt like the worst. We had a really horrible fight, and I left and spent the night at my parents'. And I was a little late, I think.
On your period?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And decided to get the old pregnancy test. Because there was that one time when, things could have gone. Only takes once. And yeah, so I found out I was pregnant. I called you at work, which was so stupid. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what day was that? That couldn't have been
That
the
was
7th,
the
right?
7th.
Oh, it was Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I was at work. For context, I didn't grow up in North Carolina, but I moved down to North Carolina to get married, and Thanksgiving was really tough.
Oh,
We were having
total disaster.
We were having a major disagreement.
I was like newly pregnant. I think I had like.
Yeah, and I was newly married and very confused about who I had just married, and it was super intense, and I was just like really struggling. None of my family is in North Carolina. I really didn't have any friends in North Carolina, so I felt really isolated. And at that time, I was writing a lot of songs, and I wrote a bunch of songs. I think I wrote 4 or 5 songs on the December 6th and 7th.
Yeah. Yeah.
They kind of made the core of the album that I made in 2011.
Wait, so you were writing some of those like before you knew I was pregnant?
Yeah. Yes.
Which ones did you write on the 6th?
I think The Road and Down and Out were both written on the 6th.
Some real happy times.
Yeah, I'd have to go look. I have the dates
Yeah.
for most of when the songs were written in on my Bandcamp page, like with the lyrics. I put the date. Because for me, songwriting can be an academic endeavor, but a lot of times it's really not. It's very spontaneous. It's very emotion driven, and then I kind of can come back to it later and shape it a little bit. But it's like,
well, especially that album.
Yeah, I've done it a bunch of different ways over the years, but that most of the core of that album was pretty intense, and I still have the cassette tape recordings from those days.
Yes.
And they're actually on the special edition of the CD, the 2 CD.
Oh, nice.
You get both. You get the cassette tape demos, and you get obviously the album. What's interesting about that to me from a musical standpoint is just like how incredibly raw the takes were at home in the moment versus like what I kind of cut and polished them up into.
Yeah.
They're still not pop songs, and they're still not like...
Still difficult.
Yeah, they're still not easy listening.
Wow, I still cry.
Yeah, it was a very intense time.
I mean, I couldn't hear them for, I think 7 years. It was 7 years before you started playing them for me again. And then...
Yeah, 2011.
It was just like a year of crying every time you played them.
Yeah.
But I still do. Like, I got more used to hearing them, and they changed. Like, you sang them differently.
Yep. Yeah, so...
But it still happened. Like, I think that it was so intense that you can't ever, like, totally shake the intensity of the time.
A big part of my personal identity at that time was really wrapped up in being a songwriter and a performer, and I really wanted to do that professionally. And you were not a big fan of my catalog of songs because they were largely about previous
I was so jealous
relationships. Yeah. And so
they're really good though, babe. I mean,
but so I felt like a songwriter without any songs. And then as we were going through our tumultuous season, I started writing songs, and then I immediately, even in December, I think like a few days after, I was up in Baltimore playing a show.
When did there was a show that you played in Chapel Hill, right?
Yeah, there was one in Chapel Hill that I played some of those songs at, and that was tough for you.
So that was the day that I realized,
this is what Mike's going to
privacy.
do. Mike's going to write poetry.
Hello, this is what's happening in our lives.
Exactly.
And I was always really private and hated sharing anything.
Mm-hmm. Is my mic okay?
But I think, and your mom never understood it. I mean, I do sort of now, but like she would just say things, and I was like, "How are you telling people this?" Like, I would be mortified to admit that I had made a mistake because I was so insecure and had no value outside of doing the right thing. So it was really hard for me to be public with things because I wasn't okay with the things yet.
Right.
But I think you were brought up in a way that was much more accepted, like this is what's happening, and you just sort of accept yourself and accept the situation, whereas I didn't. But it was good. I mean, it's a good change. So
Yeah, I had a pretty intense. I have a very different psychology than you do about
everything.
messing up.
No, but
Like,
I'm so different now.
You are so
Then
different now, 20 years later. But I think I internalized the gospel as carte blanche all the time pretty early on. Now, that doesn't mean I don't feel bad about things. I do. But like,
But I think I did in a way too. Like there was part of me that absolutely knew that God loved me.
Yeah.
But it was like external.
Right.
You know? Like it didn't extend to me.
Right.
It didn't like infiltrate my being. Whereas I think for you, it was like part of who you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I've always been really quick to forgive myself, which is a very helpful characteristic just for life's skills.
Absolutely.
But that flows from understanding that God already did something pretty majorly intense to take care of that. Like, and I don't want to like oversimplify it. I definitely am still processing the salvation of, there's a lot of levels there. But what I'm trying to say is like I was always pretty quick to talk about my own shortcomings, unfortunately, also quick to talk about other people's shortcomings around me. So but again, the issue I think that was that I was so hung up on being this cool songwriter and that being like what I wanted to do with my life, that like the instant I had new songs to play,
yeah,
I was going to play them.
Well, plus I didn't want to hear your
You didn't
old
want to hear
songs
my
about
old
other
songs.
girls, so you were like, well, this is what I got.
Yeah.
They're about you and how much I hate you.
No, that's
I love
never.
you,
I love
but
you.
also it's terrible.
It's really tough. It was really tough. I mean, I would never recommend people marry someone they don't know.
I think it was the only way.
We know that was the only way for us.
Yeah, because there's no way I would have married you had I known you longer.
Yeah, and that's worth talking about because ultimately, Eileen and I both had our own personal relationship with God, like a real relationship, a communication back and forth. And when we were talking, so I met her at a show in Raleigh, and then we didn't talk for a week or two, and then we started talking on the phone.
Well, I went to the beach to film for my art exhibit that next week, and I think you called. I
called like one or two times.
You called one time.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. There was only. Well, I think just I had one friend who was staying with me, and he was out like surfing, and I was in the house by myself when you called. I was upstairs. I went upstairs, and I was talking to you in that room, looking out the window. And this is a beach house we went back to for many years.
We know it very well now.
But it was the first time I ever went. Like the
That's
day
weird
after I met you.
that I was with you even the first time you went.
And so we just talked that one time, wasn't for very long, and then I think you called like the next week because you were still on tour at that point.
Yeah, we still had a few shows to play, and then I was just kind of temporarily settled in Rhode Island, helping some friends for what I thought was going to be open ended. I thought I might stay, but our relationship started heating up really quickly. We were having like hour-long conversations on the phone every night. And then you were coming to DC. My folks were in DC. So I came back down from Rhode Island to meet you in DC, and we fell in love and decided to get married.
I think we were falling in love the whole time.
Yeah.
But
we needed to see each other again.
Oh, yeah. We were like, we should probably see each other twice before we decide to get married.
Yeah, this is in the day of flip phones. So we didn't even have pictures of each other.
I had no idea. I couldn't really remember what you looked like.
Yeah, when I was going to pick you up at the airport, I like tried to describe what I was. You described what you were wearing.
I described what I was wearing so that you would know where to stop on the.
Yeah. So we got married really quickly, and I was 24, and mentally was going to make it as a songwriter and a performer and a recording artist. Like that's what my plan was.
Yeah.
So when I marry this woman, and she doesn't like any of my previous two albums of material,
I'm so
that I had been, you know, really proud of and touring and playing shows and all that stuff.
And they are really good.
And I was like, okay, I don't have that. And then this is really tough too. Then I wrote all these songs and then I did perform them for a number of weeks before we were eventually separated right after Christmas, right before.
It was
January,
New Year's, I think.
Yeah, in the new year. Well, it was actually right after that concert. So the concert I played in Baltimore was the concert where we stayed at my sister's apartment.
Right.
And you left from there to go back to North Carolina.
I left without you. And then
we went back.
Your mom drove you down or something?
I think so,
because I think we were kind of like all at my parents' house for a night.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how much of the story we're going to unpack right now. There's a lot to it. But I just kind of want to zone in on my insecurity as not understanding who I was or what I was doing with my life if I wasn't performing and being this songwriter. And so I took this material I was really excited about, but that Eileen was really not comfortable with having proclaimed to the world. But I didn't care, nor did I know her well enough to know that that was really insane for me to do.
Wait, which one? The old songs or
no, to be playing the new stuff that was about like our current hardships, like while we're still in it, like playing these songs live. In 2004.
I mean, I don't think that bothered me as much. I think it was just like our personal interactions that were really tough.
Well, I think what I noticed though was that every time I performed them, we would fight afterwards. And it wasn't like...
Well, I mean, we would fight
fighting all the time.
I don't know.
I mean, our joke, looking back on it, is we were either having sex or fighting. Like... Accurate. Pretty much, that's pretty much...
Or you were at work.
Or I wasn't around. But, so, there was... I feel like I'm all over the place, but I'm just trying to land this plane. Basically, as we were separated, in January, we were separated for 2 months. January until and most of February, right. Which 2 your birthday's at the end. Now, that doesn't seem long. To us, it felt like an eternity.
Well, we hardly...
Like, that was hardly known each other. That was like a third of the amount of time we'd known each other was 2 months at that point. Yeah. So it felt like a really... I mean,
it was a quarter of our relationship by the end of it.
Like, now I can blink my eyes and 2 months have gone past.
Absolutely. At the time,
we've been married 20 years.
And I didn't know if we were going to stay together.
Right. You were pregnant.
I was trying to figure out...
You were like...
What to do.
Yeah. So it was complicated. But so I wrote these songs, and as we were separated, I realized, okay, I can't play these songs either. And for me, that was an intense season of God really stripping away this identity that I had built of myself, of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be this guy, this artist, not a Christian artist, an artist, a recording artist. Yeah. Like I was determined not to make it in a subcategory. I was gonna make it as like, you know, a mainstream artist, and that wasn't what God had for me, but that was really tough because I was like, okay, I can't play this material. I can't play this material. I have no other material. And it wasn't until January of 2006. So a year later, like we were separated January of 2005. A year later, I started a new job. And the day I started that job, the folks that, I interviewed with for the position were like, oh, you got to meet Rob Watson. You got to meet Rob Watson. He's a songwriter. He's a dad. He's a husband.
Also lived in our town.
Yeah. And like, I mean, Rob and I became just like brothers, just such like I have 3 brothers. So I treated Rob like a brother. Sometimes that's not the best because you do take your brothers for granted. So Rob, I'm sorry. Rob was an only child, so he treated me like he treats everyone, which is like as the nicest person on the earth.
So kind.
But like, so Rob had an interesting parallel story in that he had a career or a batch of songs that his new wife didn't want to hear. He had a baby on the way or born, and I had one on the way. Anyway, so like, and he loved, and
Owen was born by that point in time.
Right,
so we
Owen
both
was
had
born.
Like
we had both had newborns.
Yeah.
And he loves Jesus and has an incredible relationship with God. And so we started commuting to work together. And pretty quickly, a new band started. Yeah. And that became the Whistle Stop, which we did from 2006 to 2009, pretty much until Ella was born.
Yeah.
And when Ella was born, Ella's our third child, it was just, life was really intense. And then Eileen went back to graduate school. And so the Whistle Stop kind of went on to hiatus, and it's still there, but I still kind of sometimes fantasize or dream about that coming back to life. But,
Also great songs.
yeah, we made a great record that I'm really proud of.
And my favorite record was the one you made all by yourself in the like below our bedroom. It's like our bedroom, and then there was like the office below us, and you recorded everything for Shot Friction. Love that album. And that was like right after Ella was born.
So it was neat, but I don't know why I'm fixating on this through line, but like, so this identity was kind of stripped away, and then the Whistle Stop, Rob and I started doing together, and it was very, it wasn't missional, but it was much more spiritual focused than my solo stuff had been. Mm-hmm. Like, I would talk about God in the abstract in my solo material because it's such an important part of my life, but it wasn't ever the subjects or the subject of the material. Whereas with the Whistle Stop, Rob and I talked about and prayed about and wrote songs together, and he would start one and I would contribute a little, and I would start one and he would contribute a little. And anyway, it was much more like something that we wanted to surrender to God and not have run by our egos. Mm-hmm. And it feels that way, I think. I think when you feel it, it feels very giving focused as opposed to like, look at me. And I really like that about the project. But I did do more solo stuff. Just kind of one album that Eileen's talking about was just sort of odds and ends songs that I had laying around. And once I had set up the recording situation in the basement, once I got done making that record, the Shot Friction record, I sort of rolled right into demoing the Mike and Eileen record. And this was around 2010, 2011.
Like December 7th alone.
Yeah.
That whole set.
Yeah, I pretty much recorded the Shot Friction stuff, and then I had the wheels up and turning, and I was like, well, let me go ahead and start demoing this record, which I knew was going to be a bigger record. I knew it was going to be not just me. I knew it was going to be, a bunch of people, and I had a vision for how I wanted it to sound, and we got close. I don't know that, like, if I had $150,000, it would have sounded different, but we got close to what I envisioned. Yeah. But what's interesting is, like, the Whistle Stop, we got some momentum going. Like, we got invited by Taylor Guitars to fly out to California and perform, and we got free guitars, and it started to feel like something was happening, and then life just got like really hectic. And then right when I finished the Mike and Eileen album and put it out, Eileen had just started grad school. Like, she started in August, and
I'd already started your CD release.
Yeah, and I put it out in October. So it just felt like at every step, like the work that I was trying to do was just not time. It wasn't time for it, and that's been hard. And I haven't done a whole lot with it since, just because you do get fatigued at trying something and not succeeding to whatever definition you have of success. And anyway,
I mean, I feel like you were super successful because you made songs that I love. So for me, it's fantastic. I mean,
but you get on me about not playing music ever.
I do.
And
because I love that.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, when I think about it, it is a sore spot. Like, because I guess for me, I had some sort of definition of success, and I wasn't achieving it. And so playing music just kind of reminded me of failure. So I just didn't.
Maybe we should have a How to Love Your Unlovable Music career.
Hey, we're on the right podcast. So I don't know what the scope. Well, I hope I didn't hijack the scope of this conversation.
No,
it's just kind of the anniversary of December 7th.
Yeah, I mean, December 7th is always a big day. Like, it always makes me think of the record.
The 20-year anniversary this year.
And how far we've come. Like, I think it's also always a marker of, like,
we're totally different people. On so many levels. And there's just many podcast episodes we're going to need to unpack that. Like, and to unpack how bad it was. I mean, I don't know if the average person is ready to hear how bad it was, but it was bad. Our relationship and our patterns and our the feedback loop we would get into, where my insecurity would cause me to lash out, which would activate her insecurity, which would cause her to lash out, which would cause it would become this feedback loop that I think any couple can relate to. But we're just both really passionate people.
Yeah.
And so our fighting was also really passionate.
Well, and I think there's a lot of advice. So what I want to do with you is really talk about how to love your unlovable spouse, because
I'd be the expert on talking about that with you.
Yes.
I think I'm your only spouse.
I was like, who? Wow.
Who could I call up to be on this podcast
that has a really unlovable spouse?
But you know what? In the future, maybe we can open it up to other people to talk about their unlovable spouse.
Oh, absolutely. But I think it's important for us to be honest about our own journey, because that, you know, I think seeing, not necessarily you so much, because I do think that there were lots of things that you weren't able to process or deal with at the time about what you were doing. But I think seeing the example of your mom, especially, because my mom wasn't like that. But your mom would just say, you know, say stupid stuff she did and think it was funny. Like, can you believe this? I did this. And I was like, why would you tell anyone? Like, but my fears were always of not being smart. Like, that was a huge one for me.
Right.
And so I, of course, would try to hide it any way in which I wasn't brilliant.
Yeah.
But all of the hiding is negative. But I think, anyway, I don't really remember what exactly I was about to say.
That just jumped. Oh,
yeah. No,
something that just jumped out to me is what I was talking about was a part of my identity that God was stripping away through experiences, just repeat. And I feel like what you're saying is one of your tenets of your self-identity was that you're the smart one that does things the right way. And so...
No, I wasn't. But I wanted to be. You
wanted to be
because
perceived
I felt like that
way.
Was an avenue for love and acceptance.
Right. If I do a good job, I am accepted.
Or if I am smart, people will want me around.
Right. So those were core parts of your...
And if I'm not smart, I'm not part of the group. Because I went to very smart academically rigorous schools. Yeah. And so, you know, I felt like I was lame because I wasn't making 1,600 on the SAT. Back in the 90s when it actually was a lot harder. Yeah. Anyway, so loving your spouse is super complicated. I feel like I do a much better job now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we can always get better.
But, you know, loving your spouse flows out of loving yourself. It's near impossible to love your spouse well if you can't love yourself. And loving yourself flows out of God's love for you.
100%.
I really don't know how people without an understanding of God's love, and I think maybe there's just an intuitive understanding, even if people don't know that God loves them, whatever they want to call it, but love flows. Just like creation around us, God made it all, and we make things with the natural things that God made, but it all flows from what He made. And I think the same is true emotionally. All good things that flow in a relationship flow from Him through into the relationship.
What I remembered, this is what I was going to say. So I think a lot of people give this advice about relationships, and they're like, if the relationship has these issues, you should walk away. So we had all the things
that you're supposed to walk away from.
That you should walk away from. They're like, definitely don't continue if this is true. And we had them all. And I think the reason, we are stubborn.
We are very stubborn.
So there's that. But I think the other reason was that we knew, because we both had this relationship with God, and we were both in a place where we were like, okay, can't really figure it out anymore. I was not about to let God decide who I was going to marry, because I had seen the guys who went to church and I didn't want any of them. And so I was like, I'm not really, no. I'm going to find someone different that I'll actually like and be attracted to and admire. But that always ended up horribly. And I was finally like, never mind. I guess I should listen to you. Let's give that a try. And that's when we met. And all I wanted, because it was so easy too, because so we met, we talked on the phone for 4 weeks. we saw each other again and decided to get married. And while we were talking on the phone, it was wonderful. We were so honest.
Yeah,
There was
because we weren't
it wasn't
dating.
complicated.
Or we
There
weren't
was no
dating.
like physical attraction that was getting in the way
Yeah.
of finding out who the other person really was and what, like, none of it was small picture. It was all like really big picture. And I think that was part of what our problem was early on, because we didn't know, like, how do you eat breakfast? Like, when do you get up? Like, we didn't know anything about how
Yeah.
we lived. Or just like how we reacted to situations, because it was all this theoretical, how do you
Big picture.
And the big picture stuff was
Lined
right
up perfectly.
And I was just praying, like, is this the right thing? Like, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah,
And I
same.
knew, I was completely sure
Yeah.
that you were the right person for me.
Same.
So when it got horrible,
We had that to hold on to.
oh my goodness. I mean, I think my favorite moment during that time was probably hadn't spoken to me for days, because we were having some fight, and you would get so mad, and it would take you a long time to get over it. And, again, you had woken up, I'd made you breakfast, sent you off with like delicious muffins or something, and you refused to speak to me. And I was so sad and miserable, and I was crying, and I was just like, God, what? I mean, why? Like, and God is like, doesn't always speak audibly to me, but it was audible. And he said, you're sad because you don't understand. And that was accurate. Like, I did not understand. I did not understand why we were in this situation, like why we couldn't just get along, and why you would stay mad at me, and why I was so insecure. Like, there was just nothing I understood about that situation. But it was so great, because it was also like, if I did understand, I wouldn't be sad. Like, there's something that I'm not seeing and that I'm not getting, which was actually really hopeful for me, because I was like, oh, okay, like, there is a path here. I just don't know it and can't see it. And so I think, like, I don't want to tell anyone, like, you should stay in a situation even though it's terrible, and I don't want to tell you that you should stay in a situation if it's great, because I was part of relationships that were amazing, and they were the wrong ones. So I think your metric in a relationship, really, you have to figure that out. And so I don't want to talk about whether or not you should be with someone based on like some externalities. Like, what I want to talk about is just the love. Like, how do you love them anyway? And how do you love them? Because I think what changes us as humans and how we interact with each other is love. Like, when you love me, it makes me a better person, because I have like a freedom and a joy that if you're angry at me or judgmental, that I can't tap into. That just makes me like freeze up and do a horrible job. And I'm sure the same is for you. Like, it took me a long time to be like, oh, okay, my job isn't to tell you what to do or to judge what you're doing. All I need to do is love you. And I think there are a lot of like situational occurrences of that we can like talk about more. So that's what I want to do.
Yeah. It's kind of like the opposite feedback loop. So the love thing, the sacrificial love can stop the downward spiral and create a positive feedback loop. So like when one of us is willing to be sacrificially loving, in other words, to be kind instead of right, or to be to set aside anger and be caring, or like extend physical touch even if I'm feeling hurt, right? There's a lot of different ways it can manifest, but when you humble yourself and receive love from God and offer that to your partner, that the opposite loop starts. And that loop, that's how you love. I mean, in a nutshell, that is how you love your unlovable anything. Like it's you don't pull from yourself. You receive it from God, offer it undeserved.
It's always undeserved.
And then eventually, maybe not always, but eventually you get the opposite feedback loop from the downward spiral to the upward spiral. So yeah, we have a lot of experience that we can unpack, and I think even pretty early on, I feel like your microphone is drooping. It's okay. I just want to point it at your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even early on, like within the first 5 years of our marriage, we were like, oh yeah, we're gonna like grow up and talk to other people about marriage, because we've been at the very hair's breadth of divorce and
multiple times.
And we have some real insight to offer, and marriage is hard. It's still not easy. Like it's gotten so much easier, but marriage is hard. Well, basically relationships are hard.
Life in general.
And life is hard, but
I mean, there's always
it takes
obstacles.
work. Like,
there's always a new obstacle too. Like I think because we've been together for 20 years now, and so I think the issues that we had early on are not the issues that we have now.
Right.
Like we had different issues all along the way.
Yeah.
And
we're going to keep having different issues.
Exactly. Like navigating new ones is always a challenge.
Yeah, but we're so much farther along that like problems now are so simple, because once you really deeply trust somebody, you have that to fall back on too. Like I think that we can get really upset at each other and just step away for 5 minutes and just remember, oh yeah, this is the person that I'm totally in love with. Like, let me get a little perspective here, or whatever it is. But like, maybe I just need to eat, or maybe you just didn't sleep, or, like maybe it's just not the time to have that conversation. But, there's all kinds of strategies and stuff. And I don't know that that's the primary point of this podcast, but I think we'll get into it some in post. But yeah. So,
well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll try to be a little more focused in the future. But yeah, that's us. And
that's us 20 years after December 7th of 2004, which was pretty intense. And we'll put a link to the song December 7th Alone. And that just talks about, that song really encapsulates a moment in time where I am feeling incredibly vulnerable and incredibly lonely.
Yeah.
But also, there's just like this tiny glimmer of hope with this child that's coming, which is a very Christmas relevant vibe.
Oh, yeah.
But like this tiny child, this promise of a life that's coming.
And she's the most
amazing
kid.
is just unbelievable. But also, like,
and they all are.
But Aubin coming along was, for me anyway, instrumental in growing up quickly. Like, I don't know why I couldn't do this for just you, but like doing it for a tiny helpless baby and being different. Like, I have to get my shit together. Like I have to put Eileen and Aubin first and not me. And like that, like the child helped bring that.
Honestly,
can you fix that again?
I've often thought that, and this is probably also my insecurity coming out, but I think for me, I was like, well, I don't think you would have stayed just for me. But
you may just have to keep a hand on it.
Yeah, maybe. But you stayed, I think, in part because of her.
For sure.
And I, for a while, felt really like
hurt by that.
Yeah, like why couldn't you have just stayed for me? But that's where you were at. Like, it's not a judgment on me. It's about where you were at.
Judgment on me.
No, it's not judgment at all. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't have to think of it in those terms.
Right.
Like, it's not a competition. It's not, is it me or is it her?
Right.
It's just what it was.
Well, it was certainly both of you. Like, I couldn't take care of Aubin if I wasn't also taking care of you, because you were certainly the primary caretaker of Aubin.
Yeah.
And likewise, I couldn't do a good job of taking care of you without taking a good care of Aubin, because she was your primary concern. So like you can't really separate it, but I know for sure that the timing, which felt so comedically wrong, was absolutely perfect. And I mean, they always say don't have a kid to save the relationship, and I totally agree. I don't think it's a strategy to save her marriage, but I will say that if you love your child, it is probably the single most formative thing in your life when you meet that baby for the first time and you realize that this tiny helpless thing has no shot if you're not taking care of it. And it not only how you feel about your wife after you watch her give birth, totally transformative experience, but then you meet and hold and see and smell and kiss this tiny helpless baby, and like, how can you not just go, what was I thinking? Like, all of my own selfish personal goals, endeavors, etc., pale in comparison to taking care of these two lives. Like, so it really, really fundamentally shifted my focus. It fundamentally shifted my understanding of why I was on the planet and what I was going to do. And I was determined to do a great job of being a great dad and a great husband. And it took a long time.
Yeah.
I think it took a long time, it's still a work in progress. But I think that like that became my focus, like more than being a songwriter, more than being an artist of any kind. I wanted to be a great dad and I wanted to be a great husband. And a lot of that just meant putting everything else behind that. And so there's a lot more to unpack. So, you know, sometimes it'll be me, sometimes it'll just be Eileen, sometimes it'll be Eileen and a guest. But I really hope you connect with our story. And if you're struggling in this season, Christmas season, or whatever season it is you're watching, with loneliness or deep pain, or abandonment or whatever, like, we're here to testify that our God is good. And he's your God too, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
And he loves you so much. And we can testify to that because we have done some really, truly unlovable things, and we'll share those with you. And yet his love has never faltered. It's never wavered.
Yeah. And
his love is just the most enduring thing in the universe. And that's kind of like the main thing. Like, we talk about it all the time. Like, if we became millionaires overnight, what we would do is this podcast. Like, what we would do is leverage our lives and our story to tell people that God loves you, because it changes so much about everything. And we would love to see this world be dramatically different than it is. And I truly believe there's nothing we could do more important than tell people that God loves you.
Yeah.
Because that changes everything. Like, you don't need to change politics. You don't need to change climate change. You don't need to change all these things.
They're all symptoms.
They're all symptoms of a world starving to know that they're loved. And so, like, that's just what we're into. That's, like, we're excited to see where this goes. And anyway, so hang in there. If you're in a really dark place, if you're in a really low spot, we've been there.
Yeah. And my favorite, the thing that got me from total insecurity to peace was the mantra, "You're infinitely loved by an infinite God." Well, now I would say it for myself, like, I'm infinitely loved by an infinite God. And so I just want to encourage you that you are infinitely loved by an infinite God, regardless of what anyone else in the world thinks about you, regardless of what you think about yourself.
You are.
There's nothing but love for you.
Mm-hmm. And it changes everything.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time.